Hello, folks. Welcome back for a special interview here. This one's a short notice. Things are getting crazy down in South Africa where the G18 and a half summit, it's supposed to be G20. Well, it's G19 because the U.S. in there, but South Africa's only half a point. So G18 and a half summit taking place. And Solidarity put up some fascinating advertising, which we're going to talk to with Jaco Kleinhans from Solidarity, whom I've interviewed here in the States and in South Africa previously. Jaco, goeiemorgen, hoe gaan dit?
Yes, goeiemorgen. Yes, no, it's doing great. It's raining in Pretoria, raining in Gauteng, but it's also raining all kinds of hypocrisy and people exposing themselves, to their real ideology. That's also good.
Well, before we get into it, very quickly here, what I understand is the following. Solidarity contracted with an advertising firm. They got approval to hang these banners up. And by the way, there were banners adjacent to it for some other advertising that were hanging along that one wall, and they're not removed. These banners went up, and then apparently workers at the behest of the Johannesburg Metropolitan Police Department tore them down. And Panyazi Lesufi is called Dirk Herman a racist. He's called Solidarity racist. I saw the banners. There's nothing promoting one race over another of people. It's just talking about how South Africa is the most race-controlled country in the world, which quite frankly is true. I find it fascinating, Jaco, that the world stood with revulsion at apartheid, including the United States, which applied sanctions to South Africa back in 1986. Yet today, with far more race-based laws, it's okay to discriminate against minorities. So you can talk about that in a second if you like. But so is this correct that Solidarity put these banners up in advance of the G20 so that people attending the G20 would get their attention?
Absolutely so. I think that's part of our whole campaign around the G20 summit. We've had this campaign about the race laws and affirmative action, black economic empowerment now for a few years. To give you just an idea, there's a convention of the International Labour Organization that South Africa ratified. Now, there's many countries that never ratified that, but South Africa is one of the countries who proudly ratified these ILO, United Nations conventions. And the one convention says that if you use race in any way, in terms of government policy, it can never be permanent, it must be temporary, and there must be a phase-out clause. There must be a clause where you say, how are we going to phase out this kind of racial discrimination? Like you have in Malaysia, where there's certain discrimination, affirmative action, and a few other countries. South Africa ratified that. We went to the ILO, we had a case against the South African government, there were an arbitration, we won that case, and the South African government still they even go further in terms of these policies, and you will know that a few months ago there was the Amendment Act to the affirmative action in South Africa, the Employment Equity Act. So they're not changing the racial laws to adhere to the United Nations conventions. No. They're making it stricter. They're making it more difficult for companies with more than 50 employees to employ white people. They're making it nearly impossible for small white businesses to do business with local or provincial or national governments. So they're not willing to do that. So we've then entered into discussions with government and said to them, well, you need to engage with us on this because we think that our South African remedies are finished. We've tried everything. We're going to start an international campaign to put pressure on you. And they didn't listen to that. So this is now the international campaign. And what better time than with the G20 summit here? So we've bought, like you've said, legally, advertising spaces. We've paid for that. It was approved. It went through all the approval processes the last 3 months. We bought many more of these. Yesterday, we've put up another one. Today, I think there will be 5 or 6 new ones going up today. So we're putting up all these signs from the airport in Johannesburg all the way to Nasrec, where the G20 summit will be held, even at the entrance of the G20 summit, saying just a very simple message that is true, that South Africa is the most race-regulated country in the world, 145 laws where it's possible that you want to go to university and you want to study, that there's quotas at universities for white students, for black students, for colored students and Asian students. That's the reality. That's not racism. The policy is what is racist.
Well, Well, indeed, the policy is racist, Jaco. And what I want to say very quickly about all of this is that it's fascinating because the African National Congress constantly hearkens to the United Nations. And when they want to attack the United States, they talk about the international norms and how the U.S. is out of the norms and this, that, and the other. But we now have two instances that should be plain as day for the world to see, where the ANC government, and now by extension the government of national unity, violates international norms and United Nations standards and sanctions. This being the International Labor Organization, they're in clear violation of that by perpetuating these racist laws. And the case you gave of Malaysia, if I recall correctly, that is a situation where ethnic Chinese were in power economically, and the Malaysians felt the need for the indigenous Malaysians to have a chance. And that was a temporary measure, and it's long since gone away. Is that correct,
Yes.
Jaco? Okay, good. So
You're absolutely correct. I think that's the best comparison, and I think that is such an important thing for people to take notice of what happened in Malaysia, because that's what the International Labour Organization says, that if you do have affirmative action and you do have some kind of economic empowerment scheme, then it must be temporarily, like you had in Malaysia. The Chinese people in Malaysia were a minority. They were better off. They were in good economic positions, and the indigenous people had to be empowered. But there was an end date to that. That policy is finished, and people moved on. In South Africa, we see the opposite. We now have 30 years, 3 decades of racial laws, racial policies, and it's even getting worse. I spoke last week to a cousin of mine. Her 11-year-old son plays very good cricket, a well-known sport in South Africa, and he was 2 weeks ago not chosen for a team because there were not enough black children to fill the black quota. So though he was probably in his position by far the best player, the coach just told him, we can't take you up in the team. There's a quota. We need to find a black child to fill that quota. That's the things that's happening in South Africa every single day. So if people like Panyaza Lesufi, the premier of Gauteng, the mayor of Johannesburg, all these people want to talk about racism, it's their policies that's racist, nothing else.
Well, Jaco, in fact, this winds up being quite bizarre situations with this racial quota situation. I remember quite vividly a few years ago, I reported on the story of absolute bat crap crazy situation in the Vodacom netball championships in the semifinal when a team didn't field enough white players because one of the white players was injured and they didn't have a player, so they put a black player in her stead. At the end of the game, they won it, and this is a sport where women can go to Australia or the UK and make a living by playing netball. And they could have gone to the final and been noticed by scouts and recruiters. But instead what happens is that team, which clearly won the game fair and square, had to forfeit because they had too many black players on the court. I mean, how does that balance the scales? Talk about the ignorance and stupidity of this racist policy. Using the quota system, it actually disadvantaged blacks who played. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know if you remember that situation.
Yep, I remember it very well. I mean, it's crazy. it's stupid. To give you an example, also that in the South African army, the military, there is much more black people than the quota. So there's supposed to be 81% of the army is supposed to be black, but it's something like 86 or 87%. Of people in the South Africa army are black because white people just left. They've been discriminated against. There were no promotions in the army for white people. The working conditions are terrible. So white people left, and there's very few white soldiers left in the South African army. Now suddenly, some time ago, the army said, well, we've got a crisis, where are all the white people? We don't have enough white people. It's a racial obsession. There's an obsession with numbers. They look at a business or a company or a sports team or a workplace or a classroom at a university or even at schools. And they say, well, that classroom at school need to be 80% black, 9% colored, 9% white, 2% Asian. But if there's 85% of one ray of blacks and not enough whites, then something is not right. I mean, that's crazy. I don't know of another country in the world where things work like that. It's a complete racial obsession that this government have. It's about, at the end of the day, in my view, ideology. It's about central control. It's the kind of Marxist ideology that the ANC as a political party work with. They want to control everything centrally, and that's why they say that in the Western Cape, where colored people are by far in the majority, there need to be a black majority in every workplace, in every school. I mean, it's crazy. You will need to import people. You need to ship people from one part of the country to the Western Cape to achieve that. But yeah, that's the craziness of that policy. And I think that is why our campaign is so important. Solidarity want to tell the world during this G20 summit of this absolute craziness and the damage, the economic damage that this policy creates in South Africa.
Well, Jaco, in my view, it goes beyond that, and I'd like to see if you agree or disagree with you. I mean, it's used as a cudgel against perceived enemies, calling them racist. I just saw another op-ed from Adrian Basson attacking Solidarity and AfriForum this morning, right like clockwork, like they have this stuff already drafted just to run the old, tired racial canards. I mean, is it Graham Smith, I think, was the captain of the Proteas, the cricket team. He was falsely accused of being a racist because there weren't enough black players or something like that. And in fact, after 4 years of being attacked in the media with thousands of articles calling him a racist, which is defamation, it's libel, it's slander, whether it's printed or spoken, and he's attacked endlessly. So the historical record will show that he was a racist for lazy researchers, when in fact a judicial commission investigated him of black and Indian judges and found him completely innocent. But that's the record. So they attack you, they accuse you of treason, they call you a racist, they do that to him. It is the weapon of the weak-minded. And unfortunately, a lot of people fall for it because they don't think these things through. I'm seeing the responses to Panyaza Lesufi and many people whose accounts appear to be black South Africans, but this doesn't represent most black South Africans. Let's be clear about that. But the Twitterati who are commenting are going on about how that sign, that billboard is racist. There's nothing racist about it. They're the ones turning it into a race, or am I missing something?
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, it is the billboard is against racism. It's an anti-racism campaign, that we're busy with. But that's the crazy thing of what this government has achieved. I mean, you will have an incident where 3 white players in a national sports team, sit together, and someone take a picture. And then it's racism, because you're sitting together, but you're not sitting with a black person. It's this small craziness that is constantly, every single day, used in the media, and now even in terms of international politics. So the interesting thing for me the last few months is how they draw this now with in line with America. So America is now the absolute perfect example of a racist nation, and if you liaise in any way with the United States of America, then there is enough proof of your racism. I mean, Adrian Basson said that, Reddy Tiglabi, who lives in Washington, D.C., said that just visiting Washington, the fact that we visited Washington earlier this year, prove our racism. That's the kind of craziness that this regime in South Africa keeps themselves busy with.
Well, Jaco, I don't think it'll be a problem when it comes to the Bafana, the boys, because there aren't any white players, Indian players, or color players on the team. It's an all-black team. So I don't think they have to worry about sitting with their white colleagues on the bench. But seriously, no, I understand where you're coming from in this. But let's get back to the billboards themselves. So you guys have this is brilliant marketing. Did you guys work with Nando's, because they're cheeking advertising? This is up there with the best of the Nando's adverts of getting people's attention. I mean, look, I'm sure you probably couldn't have paid enough money to get Panyaza Lesufi to make this billboard campaign famous, but that's exactly what's happened. And this must have been a closely held secret. I mean, I didn't know about it. You guys never told me about it. Very, very well done. I mean, was this a project that, I know you've talked about the campaign advertising for a long time, but these billboards at this time, this must have been something that was close hold, because people always run their mouths.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. We kept it very close in a small team at Solidarity who was aware of that. We've planned it for the last 6 months. So there's went a lot of planning in it, but we could not tell anyone, because if it leaked out in the media, then they would just prevent us from putting it up. The fact is, we were willing to put this first one up on Sunday, actually, so that was a great time. Then on Monday morning, about 200,000 vehicles drove to Johannesburg. That's how many people drive to Johannesburg every day. All of them passed the sign. And then this big story broke, and now everyone is going crazy, from the spokesperson of Ramaphosa, Panyaza Lesufi, the leaders of different political parties and trade unions. Everyone is going crazy, so they're creating a great amount of publicity. This will have an effect on the G20 summit. You know, the fact that America is boycotting the G20 summit will have bigger repercussions. You know, I already hear about other countries who may have smaller delegations visiting the G20 summit. I would still like to see at the end, in 10 days, 11 days time, if some other leaders will be there, like the leaders of Argentina and Italy and maybe one or two others, you know, that I'm thinking about, like Japan maybe. The fact is, the message is out, and they can't stop it now. You know, they've shown their real colors, and the real colors is not only their racism, but also the fact that they're willing to intrude in our right to free speech. They always love to say that that's one of the characteristics of the new South Africa after 1994, that all South Africans have a right to free speech. You know, we're a real democracy and open society. Well, then we pay for a billboard, it's approved, it's put up, and it's removed within 4 hours. That's not having a right to free speech.
No, and in fact, that's enshrined in your constitution, the most liberal constitution in the world, a constitution promulgated by a majority black government and instituted by a majority black government, ostensibly based on the American Constitution and the Freedom Charter of 1955, which calls for non-racialism and equality for all South Africans. But obviously, certain South Africans aren't allowed to speak because they get pillared and called names. And look at the abuse that Steve Hofmeyr gets from a lot of people on the political left. You know, it's fascinating to me, this campaign you've got going now, and it's certainly getting a lot of attention. But Panyaza Lesufi, I don't know what South Africans do, but I mean, the things he's writing are certainly slander, attacking people, they're defamation of character. I suspect that you guys are, and it's being reported in News 24 and the Independent Online, that Solidarity is potentially going to seek legal action against either the city of Johannesburg or whoever's responsible for the vandalism. I looked, and this actually violates city ordinances. It's against the law to do this without consulting with the people who paid to put it up. Unless it's violence or something like that, and that's not the case, or it's you know, nudity or something like that. So it seems to me there's a prima facie case here for a lawsuit.
Absolutely so. Just while we're talking now, 2 or 3 minutes ago, I received the legal papers here on my email. And yes, so we're going to court. We have an urgent application. We have a very strong case, you know. So I do believe we will be successful. That's the short-term remedies that we need to take, simply about them taking off and removing this banner yesterday. But you're absolutely correct that we need to look into what Panyaza Lesufi and other people said. Also, the member of the Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF, he is the chair of public safety in Johannesburg, so he's part of the senior management team in the Johannesburg municipality. He made some, or he said some things on social media yesterday that is without a doubt slander, you know. So we're looking today into taking further legal action against some of these political leaders, but we will not back down. I think that is the important thing. We're not afraid. They will not, because that's what they're trying to do. It's all about intimidation. They want to intimidate Solidarity and AfriForum, and we will not be intimidated. We will not back down. We will not stop doing this. They thought if they have a very strong reaction yesterday, that they can intimidate us and we will back off because we will become afraid. No, we're emboldened to do what we need to do. We will not be afraid.
Well, in fact, this has been the game plan for a long time. It's, the African National Congress for months in the past couple of years is putting up billboards and flags and banners in solidarity with Palestine and subjecting the South Africans to a foreign policy that most South Africans in the majority, I'm talking about black, white, and brown, have no interest in whatsoever. This is a pet project for the ANC and its liberation era fellow travelers, and also for a certain group of people in the Western Cape who have affinity with Palestine. But most South Africans could care less about that. And they've been putting these signs up, and they have free speech, and you put up an anti-racism campaign, and I understand that someone's already referred it to the captured South African Human Rights Commission. I'd love to see what they do with this, because if anything, the people following it ought to be the ones that are charged, because they're the ones promoting racism. You're trying to stop racism.
Absolutely so. The irony, to be honest, the vast majority of South Africans don't care about the G20 summit because they're just surviving every single day. And we saw that over the weekend in Johannesburg when a brand new traffic lights were vandalized and the copper was stolen, copper cables, from people who sell that and try to survive. Those people don't care about a successful G20 summit in Johannesburg. The vast majority of South Africans will not focus on the G20 summit next weekend. They will work, they will try and sell things and just make some money to put food on the table that evening. We saw over the past weekend also some of the G20 signs were vandalized. Big G20 signs were put up all over Johannesburg, and people painted over it with the word jobs, 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 jobs. Were painted over that. That were poor black people doing that in Johannesburg. I can promise you that's who did that. And now the government is very, very angry at that. The reason is they're a complete failure. There's a failure in government. There's a failure in the South African project, and they will not make South Africans excited about a very expensive G20 summit when government is failing. When government failed over the last few years to fix basic services in Johannesburg, at any given stage, there's about 800 traffic lights not working. There's thousands of potholes in the roads. They only fixed in the last month or two the potholes on the roads to the convention center where the G20 summit will be held. In very poor parts of Johannesburg, people have water for 1 or 2 hours a day. The sewage systems stopped working years ago. Sewage are flowing down the roads. So they fixed all the infrastructure just for the G20 summit. Normal South Africans, mostly black South Africans, understand this very well. So they're not stupid, They understand what this government is doing, and I think we're just contributing into exposing the hypocrisy of the ANC government.
Well, Jaco, I'm an accredited journalist with the South African government, and I attended the BRICS summit in Sandton a couple of years ago. And the exact same thing happened. Everything suddenly worked. Everything was fixed from the airport to the key routes there, and everything in Sandton that had been quite messy, because Sandton has really declined, was cleaned up and it looked spiffy. But within a year, it was messed up again. That's kind of what they do. What's interesting here is that this effort by Panyaza Lesufi to celebrate the removal of these things, he didn't remove them, but I don't even know if he had any role in it, but he's celebrating it and using it as a cudgel. But has he not just proven Donald Trump right? I mean, Donald Trump has talked about the persecution of racial minorities in South Africa and how the government of South Africa ignores its own law and constitutions. For instance, expropriation without compensation violates Section 25 of the Constitution. And there's no such thing as nil compensation. Nil means nine, niet, nada, zero. Nix in the Bahnhof. So, I mean, has Panyaza Lesufi, this will backfire on him. Look, I don't know if you have any knowledge, but I've certainly heard already that people in the White House are already aware of these banners going up, and they're paying attention. So it looks to me like this is a huge own goal by Panyaza Lesufi.
Absolutely. I mean, the level of international awareness about this campaign is enormous. The White House knows about it, the State Department, even some members of Congress saw posts on X about this banner that we've put up. But you're absolutely right. People like Panyaza Lesufi and others are just exposing how unconstitutional they are, how they always would like to use the Constitution, South African Constitution, when it suits them. But when it doesn't, they they will do the opposite. And the Expropriation Act is probably one of the best examples. That is one of the things that the American government first spoke out, very much correctly so. And I mean, there's great legal minds in Washington who said, but well, we know that this act cannot be constitutional in South Africa. You know, it's simply not the case. But the South African president, Ramaphosa, still decided he's going to sign that bill. President Trump said, we have a big problem, a serious problem with this bill. We did the same. Months passed, and now last month, President Ramaphosa suddenly said, well, there may be a few problems with this expropriation bill. Now, why did you sign that in the first place? Why didn't you listen to the American government, to your own legal teams, to organizations like Solidarity in South Africa? So many people spoke out, you know, to say that this is not a constitutional bill. But that is again, like with the many other issues. I mean, we've spoken together about the whole issue of farm attacks and farm murders so many times. What is preventing the South African government from declaring farm attacks a priority crime and creating a priority unit to investigate farm attacks? Nothing is preventing them from that except their ideology and their own racism. There is the specialized police units are well known in South Africa. They investigate rhino poaching. They investigate crimes on the Cape Flats in Cape Town. There's so many great examples of that. But it's all about ideology. And again, President Trump was right. He was right to point out their hypocrisy in not willing to deal with farm attacks, with the Expropriation Act, the racial laws, and South Africa's foreign policy. And we know how absolutely dishonest the South African government was in the last few months and even years in terms of foreign policy, playing for certain ideological friends like Iran and others, you know, and not saying a word about the mass slaughtering of black Africans in Darfur in Sudan. You know, I mean, that's just one example. There's so many others.
Well, in fact, that's what I've talked about. So the whole thing with the genocide case with Israel, in my view, that's on behalf of their fellow travelers in Tehran who wanted that to stick it in the eye of Israel and, of course, the U.S. I mean, because South Africa didn't join the Gambia on the unique, novel approach of a genocide lawsuit in the International Court of Justice when they took Myanmar to the ICJ, the first ever instance of that. That's an African country. Why didn't they file an amicus brief, become a friend of the court, and join the Gambia in that historical landmark case that went forward against Myanmar for the abuse of the Rohingya? They didn't do it. Where was South Africa in what's going on in Sudan right now between the RSF and the Sudanese forces? Where is South Africa when it comes to the murder and execution of Tigrayan conscripts by the Ethiopian Defense Forces in that conflict and what happened there? Villages being torched and burned. Nothing said about that. Where is South Africa? The list goes on and on and on. South Africa's government is very selective when it comes to umbrage, and they don't seem very upset when black people in other countries are slaughtered. Only when somebody's feelings are hurt in South Africa does it matter. You know, it's annoying to say the very least because there's no consistency here. It's only when it solves. And back to the point I want to get to earlier, Jaco, is that not only has South Africa, in violation of the International Labor Organization and UN standards, which they claim are the gold standard that everyone must adhere to, including the United States, they're also in violation of UN sanctions against warlords in Libya, allowing helicopters to be shipped there for military use. We've seen the photographs. Not a word from South Africa's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ronald Lamola, the failed justice minister who brought injustice to South Africa. Now he's bringing shame in foreign policy. I mean, again, am I missing something here, Jaco?
No, you're absolutely right, you know, and thank God for the journalist who exposed that story on the helicopters that South Africa sold to Libyan warlords, you know. But that is, again, the hypocrisy, you know. You can go and sit with the Pope in the Vatican, like Ramaphosa did last week. But let's be honest, he also invited the warlord from the Rapid Support Forces, Mohammed Dagalo, to his guest house here in Pretoria in the beginning of last year. Ramaphosa did that. I mean, Degalo, also known as Himeti, and his rapid support forces killed thousands and thousands of black Christians in Darfur. We saw what happened in the last 2-3 weeks, that slaughtering of black men and boys, of women in a hospital, all just executed one after the other. Absolute silence. Have you seen a media conference from our Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lamola, or from the President Ramaphosa? Or have they asked for a special session of the United Nations Security Council? They've asked for many special sessions about Gaza. There were many requests for special sessions, no special sessions about Darfur, no special sessions about what's happening in Cameroon, where people are slaughtered in the last few weeks, what's happening in the north of Mozambique, and I can go on and on. Look at the recent elections in Africa, because the ANC love to refer to themselves as Democrats, they are the greatest Democrats in the world, democracy. If you want to look at democracy, come and look at South Africa. What happened in so many African countries, Tanzania, Cameroon, Guinea-Bissau, I can go on and on, the many countries where opposition leaders were not allowed to stand as candidates, where people were removed from voter lists. The infringements on the rights of voters are very well known. Absolute silence. Not a single word from the South African government. Tanzania is part of the South African Development Community, the SADC. South Africa, so we're part in a grouping. Absolute silence. Nothing of the 700 people killed in Tanzania in election violence over the last few weeks.
Well, look, I to be fair to President Cyril Ramaphosa, I think he's got a lot on his plate. I mean, he's president of the G20. He's now the chairman of the SADC, as it rotated in his lap. He's president of South Africa, but most importantly, he's president of the African National Congress, and he's also a money launderer. I mean, he has money in Pala Pala. So, I mean, he's quite a busy fellow. He doesn't have time for those things.
Yeah, no, that's true. And he loved to travel, even when his plane broke down, like it happened over the weekend again, and he had to stand in the queue at Heathrow Airport for a British Airways flight. But I mean, it's easy to go to Bern in Switzerland, the capital of Switzerland, and meet with the president of Switzerland, and to go to the Vatican City. He loves to travel. He loves to be in China and Vietnam and all these places, But look at what's happening in South Africa. Increase in crime, increase in violence, increase in unemployment, further deterioration of infrastructure, extremely low economic growth to no economic growth. South Africans are so negative and pessimistic about the future. That will be Ramaphosa's legacy. Remember, we're getting to the end of his term. He's been there for very long now. He's been president 7-8 years already. He has only about a year and a half left of being South African president. So it's getting close. He's now in the last months of his presidency. How will Cyril Ramaphosa be remembered? He will be remembered as the president that exposed the real ANC, because the world is now seeing what the ANC really always was. That we must remember. I mean, just go and read again what Margaret Thatcher said in the 80s about why the West must prevent the ANC from governing South Africa, because the ANC would do this. The ANC is a Marxist organization. They've always been there, always had the National Democratic Revolution. They always had their earmarks. And that is why we see all these racial laws now in South Africa. It's showing the true colors of the ANC.
Well, it is unfortunate, Jaco, that the president's Chair Force One, which is unflyable, is getting refurbished right now. So he has to rely on British Airways to get back from Switzerland. But the thing about this is I think that Ramaphosa also remembered as the no growth president, because when you factor in inflation and population growth, South Africa has actually shrank. It's going backwards this year. And then what's frustrating for me, and Jaco, and I know that Solidarity and AfriForum have talked to folks in the States. I cautioned the South African government. I tried to warn them and tell them, listen, guys, you need to be serious, because these tariffs are coming back in April. and they didn't focus on the tariffs. They claimed that they negotiated, but the only negotiation took place is when Ramaphosa went in the Oval Office. They have no ambassador in Washington. Ibrahim Rasool was relieved months ago. Still no candidate to go there. So not even taken it seriously. And instead of negotiating, I mean, the three people that should be involved because of South Africa's automobile industry, its trade, and its agriculture, it ought to be the foreign minister, the trade minister, and the agricultural minister ought to be talking to America. But none of those people are in America. They haven't been here since May. They haven't come back. They're not negotiating. Yet every time we turn around, we're being told, and I believe lied to by the government of South Africa, that they're in close negotiations. They're on the verge. But, you know, I think Donald Trump putting a tweet out or a Truth Social post out on Friday saying bad things are happening, we are not going to this summit. It sort of tells me where the Trump administration is, that I don't think they're negotiating and talking about the tariffs. And the South African government has done this to the peril of South Africans, black, brown, and white South Africans. 30% tariffs are destroying South Africa's economy. It is collapsing because of this. The economy is already going to grow maximum 0.9%, 0.9%, less than 1%, lower the inflation, lower the population growth. And now at least half that's been knocked off just because the most important trading partner, the most value-added trading partner, even though it's the second in dollar terms, but you get the true benefication of producing everything in South Africa and shipping. And this isn't shipping coal and maize or iron ore to China. This is shipping automobiles, parts, and agricultural finished products. They are not taking this seriously, and South Africans are paying the price.
Absolutely so. That's the fact, and they're lying to the South African public about a trade agreement. And that's not only Ramaphosa and Lamola, but it's the Minister of Trade and Industry. And they're all telling that they're on the brink of signing a deal with the Americans. Now, I'm also in contact with the Americans, and they say, no, we're not on the brink of signing any trade deal with South Africa because President Ramaphosa still haven't responded to the demands of President Trump. And President Trump made that demands very clear and very public, not behind closed doors. It was very public to say, listen, we want to do business with South Africa. We actually want to give you a great deal. We like South Africa. We want America to be a close partner to South Africa, but just do something about the Farmer Tax and the Expropriation Act and these racial laws and all of this, and just reaffirm your neutrality in terms of foreign policy again, we don't like what you did recently. I think that's very fair. Now we need to hear on this end, the whole time, oh, we're very close. It's just the last words. There's just some final wording that need to be finalized, But I mean, that's the story for the last few months. In the meantime, South Africans are paying a price. Look at the rest of Africa. Look at the number of African countries who now have very good trade deals with America, lowered tariffs 10%, 15%. Some African countries will have economic growth of 7 to 8% this year. Country like Zambia, working very, very closely with the Americans. They expect the Zambian economy can grow at 8% this year. Kenya, same story. Many, many others, So it's not, again, the old story of Trump, the racist, Trump who hates Africa. I see that someone in the South African government over the weekend said, remember, Trump referred to African countries as shithole countries, Well, the Trump administration has very, very good relations with many, many African countries, doing a lot of trade with African countries. And I think this is what the media don't want to tell people. America, and I know that for a fact, want to have a great deal with South Africa. The American government, American industry want to work closely with South Africa, want to invest in the South African economy, want to trade with South Africa, want to even work with South Africa militarily, like what happened in the past, so many instances. But I mean, look at what we heard this weekend, that the South African government now gave a contract to the Chinese to modernize South African military bases. I mean, how stupid can you be if you contract the Chinese to modernize your military bases? I mean, they're sending all the wrong signs to the Americans.
Well, in fact, that's what I've been saying all along, Jaco. I know that you see some of my content, and I've talked to you. I've been saying, also they try to blame this on Trump. This predates Trump by many, many years. This all started as early as 2000 when South Africa refused to sign an Article 98 waiver for the International Criminal Court, the ICC. The U.S. asked for that because although our lawyers drafted the ICC treaty for the UN, we wouldn't sign it. Our Senate would agree to it, and that's who has to agree to it, because there were no protections for our politicians and for our soldiers. And so South Africa refused to sign Article 98 waiver, which meant we had to stop all military assistance, training South African officers and NCOs, and providing assistance in HIV and such, which was very frustrating for us. And from there, it's just gone. It's gotten worse as the years have gone by. This actually occurred in the Biden administration, when in February of last year, or April, I think it was February last year, when a bipartisan group of members in the House put forward a bill to review the relationship with South Africa and look towards potentially sanctioning ANC leaders and leaders in the government. That was under Biden's administration. Now, it didn't go anywhere because Biden would never have signed it, and they couldn't have got 60 votes in the Senate. But that was reintroduced by Ronnie Jackson, and now in the House, a Republican from Texas, former physician of President Obama and Trump. And then it's also been brought into the Senate by John Kennedy from Louisiana. But I think that's really just eye dressing at the moment. It's not really going anywhere because we got to get a continuing resolution approved so we can get the government open. But the bottom line here is that these issues predate Trump. Trump didn't create these issues. And every time I turn around and see Adrian Basson or Peter Dutoy or the Independent Online or the Daily Maverick all tell these stories about how Trump. It's not Trump. It's Washington, D.C. It's America's angry because we've been abused by South Africa, and they've done things to harm our interest and our foreign policy and our friends, partners, and allies across Africa and around the world. It's very frustrating because the ANC is tone deaf. They're not listening.
Yeah, absolutely so. I mean, how can you keep on kicking a good friend? And you kick a good friend and you kick him, but you always ask him for money. And he keeps on giving you money because he wants you to succeed. And after you took his money, you just kick him back. That is what the South African government did to the most powerful country in the world over the last few years. And when I say the last few years, it's 30 years. It's the whole time that the ANC was in control of South Africa. You know, I mean, if you really look at what America did in 3 decades to support South Africa, in terms of AGOA, more than 1,000 products that we can export without any duties. That was till recently. Did the Chinese do that for us? Never. I mean, silently, I can tell you that over the weekend, the Chinese announced that from next year, South Africa cannot export macadamia nuts to China anymore. That is a huge, huge problem for our agricultural industry because we're exporting, that's our biggest export market for macadamia nuts, is the Chinese market. The Chinese market is not opening up to South Africa like they want to create the perception, you know. They recently signed an agreement for 4 types of fruit that South Africa can now export to China. But we don't really have much of that fruit to export to China, you know. So you must look at real, raw numbers. Get back to the data. The data of our exports to America over the last 30 years, our enormous trade surplus that we've built with America over many years, the amount of foreign direct investment from America in the South African economy, not from China or Iran or Cuba or Venezuela, from America. The amount of US taxpayer dollars that came to South Africa for humanitarian aid, to fight HIV/AIDS, for projects in schools, I can go on and on and on forever. The impact that the American government and the American taxpayer had in South Africa over the last 30 years, it's enormous. What did South Africa do? South Africa made it more difficult for America to export certain products to South Africa. South Africa started working directly against American national safety in the Middle East, parts of Africa, Asia, sharing information, working militarily with China and with Russia. We can go on and on. You know all of that. You've dealt on this program of yours so many times with all those details, you know. But that's the reality of this abusive relationship, and South Africa abused America, which is still militarily, economically, and politically the strongest country in the world. I can understand that people want that to end. And that's not only Donald Trump. Donald Trump will not be there in 3.5 years' time anymore. But Donald Trump wasn't there last year when that bill came out in the House. He wasn't there 2.5 years ago when Democrats in the House of Representatives said we're really concerned about South Africa's policy in terms of the Middle East. I can go on. Even during the Barack Obama years, I visited America every year, During the Barack Obama years, there were discussions on Capitol Hill about the way that the South African foreign policy was shifting. So this is not a Trump thing, but it's easy. I mean, blame it on Trump. It's so easy, but it's also so lazy. It's absolutely intellectually lazy from all these journalists and political pundits who always just want to blame the whole crisis between South Africa and America on Trump.
Well, not just that, Jaco. It's all race. It's all race, 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 race. When it's not, it's utterly ridiculous. And just a couple of highlights for the audience listening: $8.1 billion to fight HIV. There are millions of South Africans alive today because the United States spent tens of billions of dollars researching antiretrovirals, which benefited Africa far more than benefited America. And the things are given away essentially in Africa, while Americans pay outrageously high prices because they bear the cost of the development. And beyond that, also, the United States played a key role in providing assistance to secure the 2010 FIFA World Cup, which most people don't know about. That's never talked about. And of course, we are the country that buys the most products from you. And it's much more than 1,000 products. AGOA allows as many as 5,200 lines of different products and services. And that's a duty-free. People don't understand that. That was preferential trade granted to South Africa and 30 plus countries in Africa on the premise that those countries signed up for the deal to adhere to certain governance standards. And chief among them is respect for property rights. When the ANC reintroduced the expropriation without compensation into Parliament back in 2018, because they tried it many, many times, it was voted down by the ANC. But in 2018, they put in after Ramaphosa came in, and we got eventually to this point where it's signed in law. In my view, South Africa was disqualified from AGOA in 2018. They never should have participated in it. The United States didn't do anything. And in my view, the politicians in the ANC and the government of South Africa got the impression they could just do what they wanted. Doesn't matter how many times they kick the big guy in the corner. He doesn't feel it because we're just a small power. We can get away with it. Well, Trump doesn't play that. Whether you're Denmark and you refuse to patrol the Arctic waters around Greenland, well, we'll just buy Greenland. Suddenly, they spend $1 billion buying cruisers and building a naval base in Greenland. Or it's Panama, who threatens to give the rights to manage the canal where 35,000 Americans died building it to the Chinese. Well, we'll put tariffs on you. Guess what? No more Chinese. Now American companies are bidding for the contract. Or it's Colombia, which agreed to take its criminal alien invader, convicted drug dealers, pedophiles, murderers back on an Air Force flight, only to have their president try to grandstand and say, they can't land here. Well, Trump was on the golf course. He picks up his phone, says 50% tariffs today, 100% next week. Well, this is a different person in power in D.C., and this is a different time. Countries around the world which have been taking advantage of America for years, like in trade, are waking up to the reality that it's a new ballgame. And if you want to get access to our marketplace, you better quit putting 75% tariffs on our poultry. You better quit putting artificial barriers in place. You better stop putting quotas on our automobile exports to South Africa, for example, and start playing fair. Because it isn't fair to our country. We wind up becoming a debtor nation because we shipped all our money around the world and all we get is abuse for it. And Trump is not going to tolerate that. Homie, don't play that.
Absolutely so, and I think that's good. At a certain point, someone had to say this is enough. I mean, again, for many years there were many discussions about this. You're absolutely correct. That already happened in 2018, but then Democrats won control of the House of Representatives, and there were certain discussions about AGOA at that point, and then a group of senators visited South Africa, and they had discussions as early as 2019 with the South African government to say, don't go this way. We really want to support you. We want to give you long-term access to the US market. We want to extend AGOA further. There were even discussions in 2019 about making AGOA more permanent. So the warning signs were out there already during the Obama years, during the first Trump term, and during the Biden term. But you're absolutely correct. There's someone now in the White House willing to expose the true nature of the African National Congress. And I think that is important. It's an heavy price that many people are paying. I mean, there's some of our members who lost their jobs. We're assisting them in finding other jobs. I'm in discussions with the American government constantly in trying to find ways to support industries like the South African agricultural industry. South African farmers are very close to America. But I think it is for the long-term benefit of all that this whole issue had to be exposed. That someone had to break it up. Someone had to show the world what the ANC really stands for, And now I would like to see what the Europeans are going to do. Because the Europeans in private will tell me they have exactly the same concerns as America. They're just as concerned about the Expropriation Act. The German government, very concerned about that. German industry in Africa, in South Africa, very concerned about that. But they're not outspoken yet, and that's what I challenge them on, is to be more outspoken. So I think Trump started something that will become even bigger in the next few years, as we will really see the ANC being exposed for who they really are.
Well, it's interesting because America gets accused of a lot of things, but we do things that are honestly quite altruistic. The only thing we were looking for with the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act is for good governance in Africa, because everybody benefits that. If there's peace in Africa, if there's education, nutrition, then African economies get bigger and stronger, and we can trade with them. That's the only benefit we got from it. And it was an altruistic standpoint. It's not like we gain money from it. I find it comical to see African intellectuals who know nothing about AGOA talk about, well, it's unfair AGOA. Unfair, yeah, it is unfair to America. You impose tariffs on our goods and services coming in your country, and you come in ours duty free, and Americans get screwed. It's fascinating to me. Now, here's something before we get to the end to wrap up. The South African government keeps talking about AGOA is coming back. I told people last year AGOA is going away. And there has been a bill in the Senate that's languished since last year. It's gone nowhere since April of last year, introduced by, I think, Chris Dodd or maybe someone like that in Delaware. In the Senate, it's gone nowhere. There's no stomach for AGOA. AGOA expired on 30 September 2025. It's dead. Now, there might be a future agreement that comes out, but it seems to me the Trump administration is more interested in bilateral agreements. With the exception of the European Union. They want to deal country to country. So AGOA is dead. So African countries better get in line and negotiate a good deal. And South Africa's not in the queue. They're at the back of the queue. They're busy dancing in Vietnam.
Yeah, absolutely so. I mean, we moved from a multipolar dispensation to a bilateral agreements, and I think there's very good reasons why the Trump administration prefer bilateral agreements, because then they can deal with very country-specific issues. In terms of Africa, Africa is without a doubt the most diverse continent in the world with 52 countries. You can't just have one single trade deal for the whole of Africa. That's in essence actually a crazy idea. The fact is there's African countries who really are reaching out to America. I've named some of them, like Zambia, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, some others, even here in Southern Africa, even a country like Zimbabwe, and everything that they've messed up in 25 years, that the current Zimbabwean government have sent more delegations to Washington than South Africa did in the last few months, to try and get them to work together. So this makes sense. This whole idea of bilateral relations to work with issues in a specific country, for me, makes very much a sense. If you look at the South African-US relationship, there's so much reason to believe that a solution can be found. It's possible for a very, very good deal. I think it makes sense for America to stay engaged in South Africa. I don't think America and the vast majority of South Africans want the Chinese and the Iranians and all of them to just come in here and take over. People believe in the good of America. There's good reason for American industry to be in South Africa, to have access to the African market. All of that makes sense. And the American demands are not crazy. And that is what angers me when I read about all these articles from the Adrian Dossons and all these people, The American demands are not unfair. It's really it makes very, very good sense. Give American companies more access to the American market. Deal with domestic issues. That's just fair to deal with. Restore property rights like you've promised in your constitution in the 1990s, and be, in terms of foreign policy, what you promised you will be: a neutral country that will work with the West and the East and will always stand back. That's what South Africa has been recently. So I think it's very fair. I haven't lost hope. I still have hope, but you're absolutely right. AGOA is finished. AGOA will not come back. It's only really Christopher Coons of Delaware who still think of AGOA. AGOA is finished. Washington moved on. Not only Republicans, Democrats also moved on and say we must need to have a new dispensation. And that dispensation will be a bilateral agreement between South Africa and the US.
Yeah, you hit that on the head. I said Chris Coons. That's who it was. Yeah, from Delaware. Yeah, I had a senior moment that I couldn't think of it. No, you're right about Zimbabwe. They're desperate. Emerson Mnangagwa is desperate in his old age to repair things with the U.S. and get access to the market. I don't know if maybe he wants to go shopping in New York. I don't know, but I do know that Zimbabwe's desperate because I personally have had overtures from Zimbabwean officials, and I agreed to interview a former official, a former minister of the ZANU-PF government. Interviewed him a few months back, but Little Birds told me that Emerson Mnangagwa actually wants to come on my program. If that's true, I'll entertain it. We'll see. But you've been very kind with your time this morning. Caught you just as you arrived, but and I'm sure this, I don't know if puts a spanner in your day. It certainly puts one in my night, but this is a very critical topic and important discussion. So I don't want to walk away without talking a little bit more about the billboards, the signs that are up now. So a lawsuit's already in the works. You've already got a message this morning about that. And then I don't know if people pursue defamation charges. That's a whole other thing. I'm not going to get into that, and I don't ask you to get into it. But what's the plan here? I mean, the summit doesn't start for a number of days. Are there more billboards coming? Are they going to be in more places? Is it all just Gauteng and Kempton Park? I mean, what can we look for? I'm going to have to get people on the ground to go out and take photos and video for me.
Yes. So yeah, we're not telling anyone where we're going to put it up, but there will be many more of these billboards.
Okay, I'm gonna help you. Okay, so Solidarity is putting these billboards in Polokwane.
Yeah. That's a good suggestion. Yeah. So we're putting up more of these billboards. We've released a documentary on YouTube, Race to the Bottom, about all these racial laws, the racial dispensation in South Africa, so people can watch the documentary Race to the Bottom. They can look out for the billboards, and then we have an international campaign. I was in America recently. I will go to Europe in 10 days' time, to the European Union, the Dutch Parliament, the Belgian Parliament, Flemish Parliament, German Parliament. We're not stopping. That's important. These guys think they can silence us. We will not be silenced.
Well, that's excellent to hear. Let's get both of us up on the screen as we wrap up here. So, Jaco Kleinhans, it's a pleasure once again. Thanks for sharing with me what's going on. Obviously, you didn't share the secrets where the billboards are, because that will remain a closely held secret. But I think this is fascinating. And once again, maybe we need to thank Panyaza Lesufi. I mean, he's made this campaign famous now. The things he's saying are quite reprehensible, but hey, he's in fine company. There's a lot of politicians that run their mouth like that. But whatever the case is, he certainly made Solidarity's campaign something that people outside. I mean, look, I have to plead ignorance. Years back, I didn't really pay much attention to labor unions. I'm not a fan of them. So years ago, when he's trying to keep his phone from going on freezing up on him there, so he's got to tap it. Now, there you go. Yeah, so it looks like you're poking me in the eye.
Sorry, yes, I've got someone trying to phone me all of the time.
Oh, that's
Sorry
what
about
it is.
That. Yes.
All right, yeah. No worries. Anyway, we'll wrap up here. But years ago, I mean, of course, Solidarity to me is Solidarność, Lech Walesa in Poland, and of course, your Solidarity predates that by decades. And anyway, but now Solidarity South Africa, I think, is firmly on the map of U.S. policymakers. It was already there, but now it's got to be firmly in their minds. Anyway, Jaco, any final thoughts? I'll give you the floor for a moment before you wrap up.
Yes, no, I think it's just an historic time. The emphasis, the fact that America, the most powerful country in the world, and the American government exposed the lies, the hypocrisy, the dishonesty of the South African government is good. We live in a very historical time. It's a great, great moment. We must take up this moment and this opportunity to change South Africa for the good. We all love South Africa. It's a great country of great people, and at the end of the day, we need to find a solution to these challenges so that we can still have a country that can create opportunities for everyone in the future. And that's what Solidarity is fighting for our people, for the Afrikaners, for the Boer people, but at the end of the day, for the whole of South Africa.
Well, Jaco Kleinhans, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and good luck today and with your campaign. We'll be watching.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, I'll let you drop off and then I'll close up the stream. Folks, that was Jaco Kleinhans from Solidarity talking to us about this billboard campaign and Panyaza Lesufi's actions and what's happening after the weekend. So there you go. And I agree with Jaco. South Africa is an amazing country full of amazing people, black, white, and brown, Christian, Muslim, Jew, and those with indigenous beliefs as well. The problem is the politics and the racism that's inherent in the laws of South Africa, which discriminated against, in effect, the entire country. And the only people who benefit from it are those who are patronage connected in the BEE world. The rest of the South Africans suffer. The number of black South Africans living in abject poverty has tripled under the ANC from 10 million to over 30 million, and the conditions grow increasingly worse with collapsing infrastructure and this horrible language to demonize people based on race. You know, even when the National Party ruled as a minority government ruling over the majority, I don't recall hearing a lot of people calling black people racist. But every time you turn around, we hear black politicians calling whites who disagree with them, or coloreds or Indians, racist. It's very toxic. It needs to stop. Well, folks, this was an unexpected broadcast. It's now quarter after 2 in the morning for me. So it's time for me to wrap up here. I've got a very busy day the rest of the day. Get a couple hours sleep. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to hit the like button if you don't mind. I do appreciate your support for the channel. And feel free to share this link with others so they can be up on what's happening with this breaking story. And thank you to my guest. I really appreciate it. Everyone take care of yourselves. And we'll be back here later in the day. God bless. And thank you for your time. Hit that like button. Cheers.